Hi, Colin and Eamon. So I'll just give a brief demo of the WeatherTop application that I've built for the final project. At the moment, I feel like I have release 3 working and I've added a couple of features on top of that. So in terms of payment, I'd be hoping for 70% and maybe a small bit more on top. So on launch, this is the home screen and the user is given the option to either sign up or log in. The forms through, I've just added some validations on them just to make sure that they're not left blank. And also on the registration form, I added a check to see if the email address is already included in the database. So in this case, you can see it's already registered, so it's prompting us to log in instead. So when we log in as this user, we'll see the details that I've loaded directly from the YAML file. So you can see here that we have location with the required details, weather with an icon specific to the weather code entered, temperature, wind, and pressure with all the calculations required, and also max and min values. To the bottom of this, then you can see we have an option to add a station. And this will demonstrate that the stations and their summaries then are being listed alphabetically. So you can see Clare goes up to the top. I also just added in a small bit of code here just to show that the station that currently has no readings entered. Again, if you drill into that, it'll give you the same, just to say that there's no details added at the moment. So we can delete off the blank station and instead go into done more just to show the trends and the extra details and the readings. So I've added in date and time for release 3, so that's obviously showing YAML at the moment, details from the file. In terms of the trends, once we have at least 4 entered, they'll start to move. They're all static at the moment, just because there's less than 4 entries. Sorry, that's because I entered in. So I've added in some checks here as well, just sense checks really on the values entered, so no really high or negative numbers could be entered if they don't make sense. So once this 4th reading is added, we'll see the trends should have moved. So you see temperature and wind have both increased. Pressure is stayed static just because I've put in 1,000, so they all the comparison is the same for the first 3 and the last 3. You can also see the date and timestamp working, so it's obviously now that I've just entered that. So readings can also be deleted off, and you can see that again that the image has changed along with that. So then in terms of the member section, required for release 3 as well. So you can see at the moment, I have the details in as my own name, the email address and secret. If I was to try and update that with no information, it will fail. But if I go back in and submit new details, you can see that the username and password has been updated there. Some of the additional small things I've done, so I've just added some functionality in the buttons there just through Semantic UI. And as well as that, just the about screen just has some more details for the user just on how to use the application. Apart from that, I think everything, as I said, is working for release 3. I'll come back on shortly just to discuss the code as well. Thanks. So just to run through some of the code as the application is running. So initially when it loads up a start page, and each of the pages are displayed by a view. So there's a number of links within each view, and depending on where you click, it will send you through a different route, which will bring you to a controller and a specific method. So for example, in the initial page here, if we click into sign up and then go through that route, it'll direct us to accounts.sign up and also accounts.register when we try and register. So just to show that first of all, so for example, sign up will just display the page, and then the register method is where the information from the form is getting passed in. So this is where I've added some of the validation checks, for example. So you can see it's checking first of all to see if any of the fields were left empty. And if it is, it's passing back a string to a new view to the user, which will display the fact that no details can be left blank, or alternatively that the email address was already registered within the database. If neither of those are true, then it will actually register and save the member in the database, and it'll direct you then to log in. On login then, when the button is selected there, it passes you to authenticate. This particular method then is finding the member, checking their password, and if they are valid and the password is correct, then it creates a session to track them, or otherwise it fails and it passes you back again to log in. So for to log in, as an example, here we can then look at the dashboard view. So the dashboard view contains a lot of different information and a few partials. So really this is where the kind of relationship between the models comes into play probably a bit more. And that here, when you're clicking into your dashboard and you've logged in as a specific user, each particular member has an array list of stations, which are made up of station objects. Each station itself then has a list of readings, which are made up of reading objects. And each reading then has these specific fields that are required to be displayed or used in some of the analysis in order to do workings for some of the other information to be displayed. So my own approach to this was to set up getter methods within the reading model, and then do a lot of the calculations within the station. So within station, I've created fields for all of the information that had to be presented on the weather summary dashboards. So throughout this model really is where most of my work was done. Initially, I suppose getting the last reading, as that's required for the weather summary. So that involved getting the last element in the array list. And the weather code, then I had to look, and I decided to use a switch statement to see which particular case the user might select, and depending on what case they select, it'll return a different string and a different image. And these both get passed back into the dashboard summary and ultimately into the weather summary partial. And similarly on the station page, we display the weather summary partial as well. So further down, some of them were more straightforward. So temp Celsius was just finding the last reading and then getting the temperature from that. Celsius to Fahrenheit, similar, except we do a small bit of working on the Celsius field. The Beaufort scale, I used a nested if just to run through and see what the speed was input as, and then it returns a certain number on the Beaufort scale. Wind compass is similar, except it's returning a string for the direction. Wind chill again is firstly getting the temperature and wind speed specific to the last reading, and then it's working on that to calculate the wind chill. I summarized the 2 decimal places where necessary, and return to pressure again was quite straightforward. Max and min temp was taken using an example from the store lab, which is assigning, for max, for example, assigning the max value to the first element in the array list first. Then it loops through subsequently each reading in that list and reassigns the max temp if the new reading is higher than the first reading. So within all this information then, for example, in the dashboard, when the view is being created for the user, stations is created as a variable, and it's set to display this particular member stations. That then is passed into the view of dashboard. You can see in dashboard then the stations are looped through and presented for each individual station in this particular list of the member. The other variables then are accessed through this this notation here, so station.name, and similarly onto the partials, they're accessed in a similar way. So hopefully that explains most of the code, and thanks very much.